Good day, my dear classmates, and to our professor in EdD 712 Comparative Education, Dr. Eva Fabrakel. I am Mr. Gilbert a Master Teacher 1 in the Division of Aklan. This day I'll be talking about education in Latin America, an overview. Before anything else, I would like to ask for your benevolence and kindness in whatever may be the outcome of this ABE. Most of us, it is our childhood dream to go or visit the land of the free. And still maybe, all of us is still dreaming about it. But then, let me discuss what is in there at Latin America. Latin America is generally understood to consist of the entire continent of South America, in addition to Mexico, Central America, and the islands of the Caribbean, whose inhabitants speak a Romance language. The peoples of this large area shared the experience of conquest and colonization with the Spaniards and Portuguese from the late 15th through the 18th century, as well as movements of independence from Spain and Portugal in the early 19th century. Even since independence, many of the various nations have experienced similar trends, and they have some awareness of a common heritage. However, there are also enormous differences between them. Not only do the people live in a large number of independent units, but the geography and climate of their countries vary immensely. The inhabitants' social and cultural characteristics differ according to the constitution of the occupants before the Iberian conquest, the timing and nature of European occupation, and their varying material endowments and economic roles. Here are the list of countries in Latin America. For North and Central America: Belize, Costa Rica, El Salvador, Mexico, Nicaragua, Guatemala, Honduras, and Panama. For South America: Bolivia, Argentina, Guyana, Chile, Venezuela, Peru, Brazil, Colombia, Ecuador, Paraguay, Suriname, Uruguay, and French Guiana. For Caribbean countries: Cuba, Haiti, Dominican Republic. For their dependencies and constituent entities: Guadeloupe, Puerto Rico, Saint Martin, Martinique, and Saint Barthélemy. This time I will discuss about the human rights education in Latin America. Based on the International Human Rights Instruments, human rights education or HRE can be defined as education, training and information aimed at building a universal culture of human rights through the sharing of knowledge, imparting of skills, and molding of attitudes to prompt action directed at strengthening respect of human rights, fundamental freedoms, tolerance, equality, and peace among individuals, within society, and among nations. Such education requires the adoption of a human rights-based approach to education, ensuring that all the components and processes of education, including curriculum materials, methods of training, which are conducive to learning of human rights of all the members of the school community, are respected and human rights are practiced within the education system. Why promote human rights education in school system? In the school system, human rights education is an important component of the rights to education, as it enables the education system to fulfill its fundamental aims of promoting the full development of the human personality and appreciation of human dignity, of strengthening respect for human rights, and of delivering a quality education for all. Yes, this is true. Human rights is one of the factors for a certain nation to prosper and develop. If every nation knows their boundaries and respect each other, there will be no rooms for war, but only peace. Characteristics of education in Latin America. Education in Latin America is intimately linked to the protection of life and the promotion of democratic values, which must permeate social life in all of its manifestations, including in those spaces, such as school, that are directly concerned with education. Among the values in question are personal autonomy, the ability to engage in dialogue and to solve conflicts rationally, and the openness of diversity and differences in the spirit of solidarity. For these reasons, human rights education opposes all forms of authoritarianism and the exploitation of human beings by human beings. Pedagogical aspects of education in Latin America. Analysis of the pedagogical formulations underpinning value-oriented education, education for international understanding, peace, human rights, and democracy confirm the conceptual relationships previously mentioned. The strictly pedagogical basis of the different approaches to value-oriented education are clearly the same. Value-oriented education, human rights education, education for peace. In fact, any one of them, as long as it is solemnly undertaken, will be deeply committed to teaching modalities, interpersonal relations within the school, structure, and organization. Respect for individual. The learner lies at the basis of human rights education. From the educational standpoint, this means encouraging the comprehensive development of the student, appreciating his capabilities, and reinforcing his self-esteem. Also, it would require a classroom conducive to freedom of thought and expression, where debate on conflictive issues associated with the daily manifestation of human rights are actively promoted. The fundamental values of democracy must always be put into practice. The human rights are not learned by rote, but they are lived. Now I'll be talking about primary, secondary, and higher education in Latin America. Despite significant progress, education coverage remains a challenge in Latin America. The region has made significant progress in educational coverage. Almost all children attend primary school, and access to secondary education has increased considerably. Most educational systems in the region have implemented various types of administrative and institutional reforms that have enabled reach for places and communities that had no access to education services in the early 90s. According to UNESCO, children and adolescents living in remote communities and vulnerable areas, from indigenous populations, those exposed to violence, living with a disability, facing gender and ethnic discrimination, are more affected and more likely to experience greater barriers in fulfilling the right to education. Latin America and the Caribbean have made progress in increasing the enrollment in pre-primary, primary, and secondary education in the last decades. Yet, there are still gaps in the access and completion of education, as 14 million children and adolescents ranging between ages 7 to 18 are out of the educational system. In the region, 1.6 million children are excluded from pre-primary education, 3.6 million children are out of primary school, and the situation is more critical at the secondary level, where 2.8 million children and adolescents are out of lower secondary school, and 7.6 million in upper secondary. The percentage of children and adolescents out of the school in the early years of secondary education in Latin America and the Caribbean is 7.7%, which is almost 4 times higher than in developed countries with 2.1%. Taking a look into higher education in Latin America. Higher education in Latin America has grown over the past 40 years to comprise more than 3,000 higher education institutions. Out of 17 million students in higher education, Brazil, Mexico, and Argentina account for 10 million. The institutional growth has resulted in a diversification of degrees offered to include more graduate degrees, like master's degrees, professional degrees, and doctorates, and less traditional areas of study. Quarter of countries in Latin America, Caribbean have inclusive education laws. A report published by UNESCO on Tuesday, June 23, 2020 shows the extent of exclusion in education now further exacerbated by COVID-19. In the region, only around a quarter of countries have inclusive education laws covering all learners. The 2020 Global Education Monitoring or GEM report shows the inequalities will have deepened during the pandemic. 40% of countries worldwide have not supported learners at risk during the crisis, and calls on the region to foster more resilient and equal societies by concentrating on those being left behind as schools regroup. According to Manos Antoninis, director of the Global Education Monitoring Report, COVID-19 has given a real opportunity to think afresh about our education systems. Yet, moving to a world that not only values but welcomes diversity won't happen overnight. There is an obvious tension between teaching all children under the same roof and creating an environment where students learn best. But if COVID-19 taught us something, it is that failure to act is not an option. There is scope to do things differently if we put our minds to it. Before my report ends, let me share to you these quotes from Brian Tracy. Be a lifelong student. The more you learn, the more you earn and more self-confidence you will have. And with this, thank you for listening.